appreciate you taking the time this morning to sit in on what I think will be a pretty useful lecture for you. Those listening on replay, have the pens and paper ready. So Jem will give you a bit of his background of kind of who he is and how he got to the point of where he is today. But I think the important thing to note is that RedBearIT are an AWS partner who effectively have built a solution very similar to what we're asking you as students to build at a probably a much grander scale. And they're taking that to their customers to help them satisfy cloud security challenges and help them embrace automation in their platforms and overcome some of the challenges that we've talked about in a traditional SOC of highly repetitive tasks, not enough information around individual alertings. And so they've started to build up a really nice customer base. So what Jem will take you through today is a bit of a background of who he is and who RedBear are, and I guess why they came to the decision to build what they built. And it'd be really useful, Jem, if you could walk through a bit of the kind of voice of the customer, why customers are asking for this, what their kind of main bugbears are. And those on the line at the moment, feel free to post any questions that you've got in the chat or just sing out.
Cool. All right, I'll just get started. So thanks, Dean. Dean says, yeah, my name's Jem Richards. I'm the CTO and CISO, really, I've got a few hats, of RedBearIT. We are a Australian-based, Melbourne headquartered company focusing around cloud security. And we've been working with the AWS cloud since it went live in Sydney, 2012. So just a bit of background on myself first. I've been working in the industry for about, it's actually 30 years this year, which is kind of surprising how that time has gone. And I started out writing software for a little while, for about 6 months. I didn't do it for very long. It wasn't really my bag, to be perfectly honest. And I quickly got involved in infrastructure. And these are obviously days of pre-cloud. I'm talking early 90s. And over the years, I've kind of moved through that infrastructure space, very much in the enterprise world. So working with all sorts of different size organizations, and really moved into the cloud space at the start of, I guess, previous decade now, 2010, for probably about 10 years ago. I started using AWS as a customer and moved to RedBear a few years after that. And we've started out really as much like the partners were at that point in time. We really started out as a migration partner, effectively helping customers understand, what is cloud? What does it mean for me? What can I do with it? What shouldn't I do with it? How do I use it? And we quickly evolved our offering to move into security, which I'll cover a little bit of why we got to that in a minute. But my current role really is, as Dean says, I was pretty much the architect, designer of our current security platform, which we've just kind of re-released as a version 2 last year. And I've been working with AWS as a partner, part of a partner team since 2015, really. Been through the certification process, was lucky enough to be appointed as an APN, which is the Partner Network Global Ambassador, a few years ago when that program started. And that's quite exciting. So I get to do some presentations and to represent my thoughts independently, my thoughts on the AWS platform and where it's going and why we use it and why we like it. I'm definitely a fan of AWS. I would absolutely agree and accept that. But I don't work for AWS and I don't represent AWS. So just quickly on RedBear. So as I said, we're an Australian-based partner for AWS. We do a lot of work with a whole variety of companies, some small companies such as startups. So LifeTech on the slide, there's a good example. They're a small startup working in the app space, looking to help parents manage screen time with their kids. Actually, it's a pretty neat sort of product. Through to people like Australia Post and Bupa, and we've helped all of those with migrations to AWS, optimization of AWS, and in general, I think all but one of those we've done security work for in the cloud. And really, the cloud security is our superpower. If you look at the kind of industry, there's lots of traditional organizations who've been doing security for a number of years, but they don't really understand cloud and how to move to a cloud security model and why cloud security is different. There are lots of partners and organizations who are really strong on cloud and helping people develop code and deploy and migrate, but they're not security focused. And we kind of operate that kind of slim kind of Venn diagram, the slither in the middle, if you like, of cloud security specialists. And that really represents our superpower. So just about where we got to. So as I said, I really got heavily involved in RedBear in 2015, which is actually the point where we first built a managed service. And that was for a financial services customer that we had migrated to AWS. And they were, developing their own software, and we built their new environments in AWS and helped them with some of their development practices. And they said, actually, you guys understand this AWS stuff. Can you just manage it for us? Can you look after our environments, make sure they're secure? Obviously, they're financial services. Security is kind of number one priority for them. So that was when we started to build a platform, and it was like, sure, we can do that. And then we kind of came back to the office and went, right, how are we going to build a managed service? So that was the impetus for the service. And back in 2015, it was, compared to today, relatively rudimentary. Still, I would still claim it was actually, for the time, a fairly sophisticated platform. And that's really because of the availability of instrumentation that we had by using AWS. That you just don't get on premises without spending a lot of money or building it yourself. Moving on from that, in 2016, we kind of added Sumo Logic as a consolidation piece for us. And the reason we did that outside of AWS is because we had some customers then who were working across multiple environments, including on premises, and they wanted us to be able to manage those from a security point of view. And we said, right, to do that, we kind of need something that's agnostic. So Sumo Logic became our log consolidation piece, log analytics piece. 2018, we did some additional capability in using the Rapid7 suite, focusing on vulnerability management. And we've actually continued with that journey with Rapid7, particularly around the automation. So the automation, which we really went hard on in 2019, very much driven by some events we went to 2019 to kind of test the water about where we thought security and managed services for security was going. And that was the AWS Reinforce, which was the security conference held in Boston. Actually the only Reinforce that's been held thanks to COVID so far. Hopefully we get one soon. And also we went to a Rapid7 Asia Pac conference where they had just released their automation product, kind of a workflow tool effectively called Connect, which is we make heavy use of for our automation. And then 2020, we re-released our platform with all those components thrown in, effectively having built our own cloud scene. And some of the reasons why we went heavy down the automation route, I'll get to shortly, but certainly, we kind of tested the water 2 years ago and saw that if we were really going to kind of stand out in the market and accelerate and be able to deliver what our customers were looking for, automation was going to be the way to do it. So what's our mantra really as a business from our security point of view? It's really about keeping our customers safe and keeping the data they hold of their own customers safe. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day for us. And just to quickly go through what we see as the key capabilities of what we offer and what we think anybody in this market needs to offer. Really, we've got effectively a cloud-hosted scene. And why do I say it's cloud-hosted? Well, it's infinitely scalable, effectively. We've got no limits in terms of what our customers do, numbers of instances that they spin up, numbers of environments they run, numbers of amount of patching they need to do, whatever it might be. We have no limits. Our platform, imposes no restrictions. We've got no artificial limits. We can scale out. Our solution is very much built around a serverless model using Lambda. So every action is effectively event driven in the security world. We use Lambda to not only manage the kind of workflow, but actually do the auto remediation. We can scale that. We'll see some numbers later. We can scale that to thousands per second if required.
Yeah, I'm really curious as to the origin of that image.
That is a place near where I was born in Cornwall called Porthleven. It's on the south coast of Cornwall in the UK. I took that photo standing on not out on the pier, but inland from the pier just by the church. That was a winter storm.
Wow.
Pretty ferocious down there. There's like a barrage they put up in front of the harbour. I was in the harbour, so I was safe. But yeah, it gets pretty ferocious down there. So back in the day, much of the town has been swept away with various storms and floods and stuff. It's kind of in a deep valley, so it's got the double hit of the sea and the secondary hit of, when it really gets stormy weather, you get all this water coming down the river. So it's a pretty amazing place, actually. So if you ever go into the UK, go to Cornwall, go to Porthleven. It's a pretty cool town. So, well, a village, really.
Very nice.
We try to keep our customers safe in the stormy waters as well, right? We are that barrage. So there you go. Cornerstone of what we do is visibility, right? So, if you can't see it, you can't measure it. So, you've got to know what's going on in your environments. The visibility is, we always say to our customers who are even, not looking to adopt our service, but looking for us to help build their own security capability. It's like, if you only do one thing, it's all about the visibility. Let's give you that insight. Let's give you the alerts into what's going on in your environment. And the beauty of the AWS cloud is the instrumentation and the level of data and the amount of data you can get on what's going on. So for those who know, AWS CloudTrail is this kind of corner. It's pretty much a foundational, from a security point of view, a foundational service that tells you about every action that's performed in your AWS environments. And that's whether that's read actions or write actions. And it's on every resource you have or may not have anymore. CloudTrail is absolutely foundational. It's like, if you were to think about an on-premises environment, how would I actually be able to have that level of visibility? That would be a very expensive proposition. So CloudTrail is a fundamental tool that we use. Full visibility is absolutely fundamental to being able to make sure that you can secure your environments, you can see what's going on. And that's everything from log files, from network data, application data, all the services, who's sending data to what, who's talking to who's trying to do what, even performance, right? So a lot of people think of performance is not a security measure. But if I'm measuring the amount of traffic coming to a website and I'm measuring the performance of instances that are serving that website, and I'm suddenly getting spikes in CPU and I'm not seeing any more web traffic, do I need to worry that there's something else running on that instance it shouldn't be running, such as somebody doing Bitcoin mining or whatever it might be? So full visibility is kind of foundational. If you're going to do automation, you got to see what's going on first.
Jem, it's a really good point, and I'd be curious to kind of pick your brain as to, what are your customers asking you to have greater visibility of? What are some of the examples of where customers have either used CloudTrail or similar services to gain that visibility for, implementation against use cases?
Sure. So our customers, a lot of them don't really understand what's available. It's the first challenge is, they may have heard of CloudTrail, and yes, nowadays it's on by default. Same with GuardDuty and some of the other tools, and VPC flow logs, which for network monitoring. They know of these tools, but they don't necessarily use them. And if they do use them, they're turned on, but no one's looking, which is the first kind of challenge. It's great. That's fantastic from forensics. At least I've got some data to look at, but I'm not actively looking. So the first challenge is we find with customers is really enlightening them as to the possibility. And I think a lot of them don't actually realize what the opportunities are in the environment. They're basically no cost, right? You get access to this data and it doesn't really cost you anything, or it costs you a very small amount of money to be able to see what's going on in your environment. And so there's a lot of education we do just on the standard services. What we also add on top of that then is we look at things like flow logs. We actually look at the traffic patterns and we try to interpret what's actually going on against what's normal. So the big thing about visibility from our point of view is being able to understand what a normal day looks like and what an abnormal day looks like. So when things are different, effectively, that's events of interest. We don't, we're not in the world where we can rely on looking for a pattern in a log file. So we look for a string in a log file to tell us there's a problem. That's not really sufficient in 2021. What we need to be able to do is understand changes in behavior. So that for us, that's a big education piece for our customers. And actually is the next slide. So, it's all well and good, as I said, to collect that data, but you need to do something with it. I mean, it's a double-edged sword in the cloud. You have this level of instrumentation and visibility, but it also means you've got this massive amount of data and a huge amount of log information to deal with. And the obvious question is, how do I pick through that? And yeah, you don't pick through that manually or looking at it. You need the machine to be able to help you interpret that data, tell you what to look at, what to focus on. So I've got some data on numbers out of our platform later on that I'll share that gives you an insight into the kind of scale we're talking about. So the security analytics is really about understanding, is this something I need to look at? This is a problem. So take it effectively from a piece of data to turn it into information. And does that become an event because there's something going on which is of interest? And what do I need to do with that event? Which is where potentially automation comes into play. So the security analytics is really the next building block on top of the visibility. Obviously, the visibility is being able to see it. Security analytics is being able to unpack it and tell me what to do, what to look for. What do I need to look at? What do I need to care about? Is how do I reduce false positives? And security analytics is the ongoing challenge for everybody, right? There are new attack patterns, there are new security services that you need to be able to work out what you're going to do with the data that they generate. And this is the stuff that we spend a lot of time working on as an organization, along with the automation and always modifying automation. But the analytics is that you've got to feed and water it all the time. It's never static. In some ways, the visibility is easier to deal with. You set up your collection, and that doesn't change unless you add new services or you change something in the source system. So the security analytics is where we do a lot of the heavy lifting. We use a lot of the pieces of Sumo Logic to do that for us. We do our own. We use some of the Rapid7.
Have you got an example, Jem? Because security analytics, especially in my day-to-day, is probably an overused term in the industry in general.
Sure.
And definitely for, I think, the students community, reading up and researching on that is difficult to pinpoint. So
Sure.
is there a good kind of example of where you do that kind of correlation, etc.?
So I mean, even in a single source, so we talk about CloudTrail. So, you can pull CloudTrail logs, which obviously are, as we've said, are kind of critical, and you should absolutely do that. You can pull CloudTrail logs and you can report on somebody doing a highly privileged action, like creating a new user or whatever it might be, for example. That's really easy to do. But what we also look at from an analytics point of view is we'll look at user behavior. So if a user is not doing a privileged access or privileged action, but if they're suddenly looking at, say on average, if we think of S3 objects, this is one of the things that we do. If you think of S3 objects, and they normally look at maybe 100 objects in an average day, and suddenly they're looking at 10,000 objects in an hour, that's an indicator of potential compromise of that user account. Or, there's a potential data loss prevention piece that you're trying to do. And that's an analytics piece to actually pull that data and make, look at what's going on, say this behavior is not normal behavior for that user. So that's what I mean when I talk about things like security analytics. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm curious, do any of the students have any questions around that piece? Because it is a difficult topic to kind of bed down, given the broad nature of what it is.
Deep, very broad. You could probably spend the whole multi-terms talking just about analytics, security analytics.
Yeah, just quickly on that, Jem. I think you found it interesting that you said, it's not always, it can sometimes be trivial to obtain the data, but like you said, deriving insights from that is quite difficult. I'd like to hear what you think about like machine learning and AI and data science tools to learn patterns in security. And do you feel like that's sort of somewhere security will be going a bit more, or do you feel like that's at this current moment not reliable for doing that?
No, 100% think that's where we'll be going. I don't think it's there yet. The trouble with the machine learning is it's all based around training and your data. And And, you know, the model, we don't really have those models yet. We're building them, and there are lots of people, there's a heap of work that's going on in that space. There are a number of vendors who are starting to offer products. It's difficult to do it in real time with the amount of data we've got, with the current machine learning models that we have. That will change. Of course it will change. But yeah, that is the space, because what you know, machine learning brings to the party is the ability to be able to adapt.
Right.
The ability to be able to not rely on a human to make a judgment call and an algorithm about what the sensitivity or the the confidence you have in a particular alert. Right. At the moment, my guys are effectively, we're making judgment calls on algorithms to say we reckon the threshold is you know, we're not using hard and fast numbers. We use percentages, you know, percentage change, for example.
Right.
But we're having to tune that machine ourselves at the moment. That's where machine learning can do that for you. And yes, absolutely, you know, that will become a very significant part of how we deal with security. You know, one of the things I want to do is be able to just monitor network traffic and be able to say, give me a level of confidence that we're seeing a ramp up in somebody that's going to become a full-on attack into that network. I'd like to be able to see that in real time, percentage confidence that there's an attack about to happen or going to happen in the next hour on the network, based on the traffic we're seeing compared to where we've seen that traffic before in other attacks. We cannot do that yet, but we will be able to do that.
Okay, so do you have plans for building out like a sort of managed service for that? Because I know that, like, for example, I don't know if you've heard of like Darktrace.
Yep.
Like there's some existing, like there's not many, but there are a few in the cyber AI space. I think Darktrace is probably the main one. But
Darktrace is probably the most well-known in this space. Yeah.
I mean, they basically do what you just said. Yeah.
Yep. We are looking at that. We are, you know, that's just a kind of research project that's going on at the moment amongst the team. Yeah, we don't have anything that we're putting into the market yet, but absolutely is where we'll be looking. You know, we know there's a limit to how far you can go with the kind of effectively static models that we have at the moment.
I think it's an interesting question, Sean, in the context of education and areas of concentration. What I've seen in the last maybe 5, but closer to 3 years is organizations and also vendors obviously embedding data science into their security teams and looking at ways in which they can use the vast amounts of security data that they have to define better outcomes. So looking at, you know, running unsupervised and supervised machine learning models over the top to effectively look at working out the unknown, because the traditional approach to security for many years has been the kind of if this then that, you know, follow the bouncing ball. I know this behavior and I know it's bad, therefore set a rule to decline that connection, block that proxy, you know, whatever the outcome is. And so a lot of organizations are looking at data science and in particular data scientists as a future cybersecurity kind of profession within their organizations. We used to have one at the one or two actually at the organization I worked with, and I know a number of the banking customers have embedded them into their security teams to try and ascertain some of those outcomes where you're bringing in multiple outliers of information to define an outcome. So one of the ones that one of my customers used to be obsessed with was building a behavior of someone who is about to leave the organization. So someone who's acting
potentially insider threat.
Yeah, exactly. So they're either walking PII out the door or taking the customer database, whatever that kind of motivation is. They were obsessed with understanding what that behavior would look like. And for them, it was a difficult one, right? Because if you think about the ways in which people can exfiltrate data from an environment, you could take a photo of a screen. Good luck capturing that. You could send documents to a printer. Yes, you know, you may be able to kind of track increases in usage of printers, for example, but there's a lot of ways in which you can do that. But given, I guess, a host of those mechanisms running in parallel, you can more quickly and more accurately get to a behavior versus if I see this, I think it's that, therefore do this. Whereas when you use that vast amount of data across multiple sources and you're running that kind of, you know, machine learning models over the top of that, you can hopefully in the future, because I don't think, to Jem's point, we're there yet, more accurately ascertain behavior.
Yeah, I think, and even I think where I'd like to see, or at least maybe if it's already there with existing solutions, but see AI and data science used on like the remediation and automation side as well. Like I think even now it's probably a little easier to get started with, you know, training models, as Jem said, to at least detect patterns and, you know, detect, you know, commonalities in data sets. But I wonder if we'll get to a point where, you know, you can get, you can use AI and machine learning to actually automatically remediate and automate processes as well. So the incident response part of it as well, that would be really interesting.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that, right? Because so there's native services that exist today which have machine learning baked into them, like guard duty, for example, which will detect anomalous activity. I don't think I necessarily agree that we need AI and machine learning on the back end, because I think there's a mixture of, you know, machine and also human intel that needs to go into that process to, via the use of APIs, automate what the action is based upon that. So there's still a lot of, especially in large enterprise, there's still a lot of reluctance to completely automate because of the, you know, everything we've talked about here, right? The lack of context around alerts, the lack of, you know, positivity around the number of alerts generated and the accuracy of those generations. So there's still that kind of human component, I think, that needs to be taken into consideration. And yes, it can be absolutely achieved, you know, in air quotes, easily via APIs these days versus previously. But I'm not sure about AI machine learning in the response side of things.
Yeah.
True, because there's still be like business logic on that end, I guess. It's a good point. But
we're going to talk about the automation in a bit, but actually the building the automation piece is actually not the hardest part. The hardest part is working out what to automate and how to do that securely.
Right. Okay.
I still think security analytics is where there's a heap of progress that's going to be made. You know, some of the things, just to give you kind of flavor, the other stuff we do is we score events. So against endpoints and against users, we score events. We give them like a risk score. So if you do something that's relatively low risk, that's not going to raise an alert, we'll just score it and we'll store that away. If you do lots of little risky things over a short period of time, that's going to create an alert eventually. And that's the kind of traditional security vendors don't do that stuff. So they'll just, you know, you've done something risky, I'm going to raise an alert and someone's going to look at it, or we're going to automatically shut you down, or whatever it might be. So a lot of, you know, if you look at the data on breaches, I think it's the last data I saw is the average dwell time before somebody spots they've been breached is 94 days.
Wow.
And there's been a lot of low-level reconnaissance that's been going on in that time. So the challenge for us as security professionals is being able to spot that low-level reconnaissance, which is why we do this thing where we score every action. And if your score goes over a certain number in 7 days, then that raises an investigation.
So like sort of cumulatively sort of appraising the scores as opposed to just individually. Yeah. Okay.
That's the fun. We like that. That's the fun stuff we do. So there you go. Give away a bit of our secret sauce there. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So the key thing on top of security analytics is, you know, as I said, it's all about kind of finding out the alerts that you need, or discovering the alerts you need to do something about, or you want the machine to do something about. And part of the puzzle of doing that is really that threat intelligence and enrichment. So you can't just pull a piece of data in isolation and expect to be able to gain an insight from that data. You need to be able to kind of correlate it. We use data enrichment through things like, you know, CrowdStrike and various other feeds. We obviously, as I said, do this scoring as well over a time period, and we kind of push all that data together to then say, well, is this something that is effectively an alert? And we also use threat intel, so we do the proactive stuff as well, which is kind of covered in the next one. Things like vulnerability management, so scanning of endpoints, scanning of networks, just to continuously kind of probe the environment and make sure that, you know, there's nothing going on, or there's, you know, it's like patching is a classic example, which really leads to his own question about, in the cloud world, should you even be doing patching, or should you just be continuously replacing instances? So we've got one customer who's running a rewards system for, it's actually a, you go to a restaurant and you earn, they used to earn points, they now earn, it's kind of a currency. Liven actually is the company. Don't know if you've seen their kind of little red stickers in various cafes, and they use their own currency now, so they're running on blockchain in the background to be able to deliver that currency. So for them, for example, we don't patch their instances get replaced every day with the latest image. So they're on a rotational automatic, through auto scaling in AWS, they just get replaced. But vulnerability management, again, comes into that intel and that enrichment piece. It's really about trying to understand more about your environment proactively, not waiting for something to happen and then saying, well, what happened and what do we need to do about it? It's saying, well, what is the security health of this environment? Is there something that we need to know about? So that vulnerability management also includes discovery as well. So if you're using your AWS environment and you spin up a bunch of new instances in 2021, you're not going to send a ticket to your managed security service provider to tell them you've done that. You're just going to do it, right? So we pick that up. We just discover it. We automatically enable monitoring of it. We add the various agents to it. We make sure it's patched. We make sure it's backed up automatically. So, and that's the world of 2021. That becomes, when we talk about automation, and there's a lot of focus in security on automated response, as there should be. We also got to factor in automated discovery as well. You've got to know when things change in that environment, and you've got to know what that change means. And you can't expect somebody to tell you, and you can't expect somebody to go in and get hands on keyboard and do something about it. You need the machine to be able to do that for you. And we're source agnostic as well, which is really important, right? So all our customers are in AWS, but we don't mandate what services they use. They can use sources from outside AWS if they wanted to suddenly, if they're in a hybrid environment, they've got on-premises environments, they'd like us to manage those from a security point of view. As long as they've got a log file, or they've got an API that we can hit to pull data, we can pull it into the platform and we can analyze it, and we can add it to our monitoring and our alerting. And that's the way customers are going, right? We can't tell the customers what environments they should be using. We can't tell the customers what services they should be using. They're going to tell us what they want to use, what they're already using, and we have to make sure we can manage those for them. So why, we've talked about automation. Why do I care about automation? Why is it important to me, and why is it important to our business and our customers? First thing to cover is, there's a massive skills gap in security professionals. Now we're talking 4 million. The expectation is I think this is by 2022, there's going to be a shortage of 4 million headcount in skilled security people globally. It's a huge number, and the vast majority of that is in APAC, actually. So there's a massive opportunity for people who understand security, and particularly cloud security, because that's where the world is. It's not where the world's going, that's where the world is. So we're never going to close that gap by training people. We can't get 4 million people trained in 2 years in how to be really good at this stuff. So we need some help to do that. And automation is the way we do that. That's the way we help to do that. So we're scaling our business, RedBear. We're bringing on new customers. I'm not scaling people to support our customers at the speed we're bringing on new customers. I don't want a floor full of analysts. I can't afford a floor full of analysts. I want the machine to do most of the work. The machines don't get sick. The machines don't take leave. They don't go to sleep, right? And they scale, as I said before, with our heavy use of serverless, they scale. They scale as far as you want to take them. So that's, the kind of one of the prime reasons for us to do automation.
Hey, Jim, just on that point, because I think it's really interesting, if you just pop back a slide in the interest of education and students' career paths.
Yep.
Curious to hear your thoughts on what you see the future of security operations as. In my opinion, it's pivoting more from that manual, catch, pass, analyze, into the building of automation. And building of contextual awareness. So exactly, I guess, what the students are being tasked to do here in this project. Curious if you agree, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. So I think there are two security operations will effectively have two functions, two primary functions in the future. One is, as you say, is building and refining automation and greasing the wheels of the machine and make sure it's operating, which is a key piece of automation, by the way. Just because it's silent doesn't mean you've got no security alerts, and maybe your machine is broken. And the second one is compliance. So making sure that your environments are compliant. So becoming that governance piece effectively. Those are going to be the roles of security operations. Yes, there's always going to be a time where you need to respond and do something, but I'd expect that becomes a small percentage of somebody's time. So I have a weekly meeting with the operations guys here, and we talk about what they've seen. What are the opportunities for automation that they've seen that we've got a backlog, which we reprioritize every week. So what should we focus on? Because I'm expecting them to be spending about 70 to 80% of their time tuning and building automation. Yeah, so 100% agree.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway for the students on the call and listening in from this slide is that this is an international standards body that's undertaken this research. You can see there, and to Jem's point around APAC leading the way in terms of skills shortage, this is an area, hence I guess why we became involved in this program, is really to help the students now entering the workforce tomorrow have the skills necessary to make that leap. And what we're seeing is that the shortage in our business, the shortage in Gem's business, the shortage in our customers, the shortage in our partners, it just opens up a wealth of opportunity in cybersecurity, cloud security, whatever angle you want to take. And so, yeah, I just keep encouraging you to pursue this career path if it's of interest to you, because it's A, something you can easily get passionate about, and B, a career path that could take you in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's a fantastic place to be. It will be a fantastic place to be from a career point of view. There's some really, we've already talked about machine learning. There's some really cool, interesting stuff going on in this space. It's a brilliant time to be involved in cloud security. If you're somebody who really understands cloud security, you can see you're going to be in a small pool with a lot of demand, and you get to do a lot of fun stuff. This is not the day of operations where we had, low skilled people sitting in the corner, staring at screens and swapping tapes every now and then. That day is long gone, I'm glad to say. So it's a great area to be in. It's a really exciting area. Really is at the forefront. In a lot of ways, it's at the forefront of advancements in technology. So yeah, on the automation side, I kind of mentioned it before, but just wanted to mention from our point of view, it's about discovery of changes and new assets in environments as much as it is about automated response. A lot of people focus on the automated response and don't really talk about the discovery side. So that for us as offering a managed service, that's really important. We don't have the time to be able to manually deal with changes, so we need the machine to deal with changes for us. But a big focus, of course, is on that automated response.
It's an interesting point, though, Gem, which circles back to your point on visibility earlier. When new assets are added, are they in compliance with the kind of frameworks we set in place by acceptable use? Are they scanned for malware? Are they scanned for vulnerabilities? Do you just want to talk around a little bit of how you address that, or how you would point the students in the direction of the impact of that?
Sure. Yeah, so the reason we do that is just to kind of add to what Dean said there is, if I'm developing a new application or whatever I'm doing, and I spin up a non-production environment and I drop some data in there and I do a bunch of testing and it runs for 4 hours and I tear it all down again. What was in that environment? What data did I have? Was it exposed to the internet? Who was connecting to it? Who accessed it? Both internally and externally. From a compliance point of view, you need to understand that. And you may not get any alerts out of that, and you may just use that so you've got the data from a forensics point of view in the future. But we can't just think of security and managing environments as a production problem. It absolutely is not a production problem. It's a problem across all our environments. So being able to make sure your non-production environments are as secure as production is 100% part of our job, right? So we talk about, you might have heard the term of moving security to the left. It's all about baking security into the development cycle, into that, how do we think about security in design? How do we implement security when people are doing deployments through their CI/CD pipeline? What we're trying to avoid is the old days where people would go off and write code and build environments in non-production, and that would take months, and we'd get to building a production environment, which probably doesn't look much like the non-production environment because it's all manually built. And we're 2 weeks before go live, and we go, oh, we should do a penetration test on that new service. And you do a penetration test, and the product manager signs off on the vulnerabilities that are discovered because he's got a deadline and he needs to launch that product, right? Trying to get away from that, because it's to fix those problems once you're in production is obviously the risk, it's there. But the cost of fixing that in production is exponentially greater than if you fixed it back when you first deployed it to a unit test environment. So what we're trying to do is be able to bake security into the normal day-to-day. It actually makes your business run faster. So people think of security as a kind of a hurdle they have to climb over. If you bake it in, it actually makes your business run quicker, because you don't get to that pause where security does a review, does an audit, and does a pen test. You don't have that because you've been testing it all along. So the discovery for us is discovery of new services is key to how we do that. And with the AWS cloud, because you've got all these APIs, it's actually not difficult to do that. So we have a bunch of Lambda functions which get triggered. We use AWS config as one of our data sources. So when a new resource gets created, it fires off a Lambda function, which then adds it to our monitoring. We get notified, adds it to our monitoring. It tags it so that a bunch of agents then get installed, and it gets scanned. It gets vulnerability scanned automatically. Nobody does anything, it just happens. And if that just happens and then it disappears after 2 hours, and we didn't really notice, that's okay, because we've got all the data about that environment. So that's pretty much how we do discovery and why we do discovery and automate that whole thing. Does that answer what you're looking for?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's good background.
So the other reason we do this is, I said before about the amount of data. This is data from our environment from January, actually. So in January, we processed 3.5 billion. It's actually this February, it was actually just over 4 billion. 3.5 billion messages. That's over 1,000 a second. We ran 134,000 auto remediations against that. So that's 1 every 20 seconds. It's actually slightly less in February, which is interesting. And we looked at 58 alerts. So our team manually triaged 58 alerts. No breaches, I'm glad to say, but we manually triaged 58 alerts. So that's the scale. That's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to deal with billions and billions of data points, and being able to say, now those 134,000 auto remediations, if we were to get somebody to manually do something about those, and it took 10 minutes, I think I did the numbers, it was something like 2 months worth of work for somebody full-time to do that. Obviously we're not going to do that. So that means there's a bunch of stuff that we're kind of going to de-risk and say, you know what, it'd be nice if we could do something about it, but we'll just ignore it. We don't want to do that. With the automation, it allows us to provide, a far better service, to be perfectly honest. We can do it at lower cost, of course we can, but it actually gives us a higher quality service than we could do otherwise. So for us, it's absolutely critical to be able to do that. So that's why we spend a lot of time building that automation, and you guys are doing it this term. I'll tell you, we spent 3,000 hours on it last year. So you don't have 3,000 hours, so I don't expect you to build what we built, but it's fun, and there's a lot of stuff that you can get out of it, but it doesn't happen automatically. One of the key things is you've got to understand what you want to automate. And to do that, you need, if you're going to say, well, if this happens or we get this kind of alert, then you need to know what, if you were to do it manually, what you'd actually do. You need to build a playbook effectively. So what you're doing is you're automating your playbooks. So the first step, we talked all the way back, talked about visibility. the second step really is like, once I'm getting those alerts, I build my playbooks to say, if I get this kind of alert, this is what you do. This is the path you go through. And once you've got that, you can go, all right, what can the machine do? Can the machine do this? Can we automate that bit? Can we automate the whole thing? Now, some things can be very expensive to automate. You've got to really think about how often do we see that, and what's the value proposition and the payback for us to actually automate that. So there's always, automate. We were talking about using machine learning for automation. There's always going to be probably always going to be a manual input saying, is this worth us automating? Or is this a once in a year alert that we get? If we're going to automate it, it's going to take us 500 hours to build it. Is that worth doing?
Hey, Jem, there's a question on the chat around the use of native AWS security services. Conscious you've spoken about a couple of third parties, GuardDuty, Inspector, etc. Which one of those do you use? And
all of. We use everything we can get, right? So we double up on a lot of things. So absolutely, we use GuardDuty. It's a fantastic tool. Saves us, it saves us having to build stuff ourselves, right? So I've seen it before with our own environment. We built stuff, and then 2 months later, AWS released a new service or an enhancement. It's like, well, we don't need that anymore. We can just use the new service. So yes, we absolutely use GuardDuty. We do use Inspector. We actually use Inspector for the network reachability testing. We don't use the Inspector agent because we use Insight VM for that. We find it just gives us more information, more targeted information for us. But yes, we do definitely use Inspector. We use IAM Access Analyzer. We use, I'm not sure if there is a security tool in AWS we don't use. Config, I mentioned before, is a big one for us. It's not just a configuration management tool. You can use config to trigger actions or trigger notifications. So config's a big one for us because it's a great tool for telling you about changes. We use CloudWatch. We use CloudWatch events, and we use CloudWatch logs. We don't use synthetics at this time. We use a third-party tool for that called Site 24/7. What other AWS native services do we use? I mean, Lambda is obviously, Lambda kind of runs everything for us. So our whole system is very much event-driven. So we use Lambda heavily to be able to manage that entire operation effectively. And the events, come from a variety of sources. The reason we use the other third parties is because we like to, we hook in a whole bunch of other things that we do, like some of the threat intel stuff I mentioned before. We raise tickets in our ticketing system as well. We also, as I mentioned before, data's sometimes coming from non-AWS sources as well. So can you build everything we've done in AWS with native tools? A lot of it, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you could. But, I'm very much of the mantra of I'm not going to build stuff if I can buy it that suits our needs. And if we can plug stuff together to make it work, that's certainly what we do. So just when we talk to our customers about automation, it's certainly from a security automated response point of view, it's very often an interesting conversation, and the flow goes very much, wow, we've now got visibility, but we're not sure we want to hand over the keys for automation yet. That's often where you start, which is, I think, surprised me the first time. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, for a lot of people, just having this level of visibility is new, right? And to then make that kind of immediate leap to, what, we can see a bunch of stuff and we're just going to let the machines deal with it. Don't worry about it. People generally want to see what's going on first. They want to kind of build that internal map in their head of baseline of normal. But you find quickly people go from, can we just look at something low risk? So a great example of that is, if you're thinking of VPC flow logs, malicious IPs. So if you just look at malicious IPs coming into your network, so that's pulling the IP information of people who are trying to access your services and throwing them against things like CrowdStrike to determine their confidence of malicious IP, and then blocking them automatically. That's a pretty low risk thing to do, particularly as you can do that. You can target that at effectively the per application basis, because you can control how you do that through things like NACLs or whatever you might want to use. So that's where we normally start. We normally start with something low risk like that. And then you go, wow, that's great. Like, I don't even have to think about this. It just happens. I get a notification in the channel that I may or may not look at. And I don't really need to worry about that anymore. And that always leads to people go, right, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about this automation. So where do we go now? And that's when we kind of open up, if Pandora's box is the right thing, that's a negative comment. We open up our box of treasures and go, right, this is all the automation that we do. We can just turn it on and off we go. And then people start wanting to build automation into their practices. So how do we actually, talking about the shift left again, how do we actually start to now build that automation into how we think about security and how we do security from when we're building a product from scratch, you know, not just this automated response. So and quite often we find that they rely on people like ourselves to actually do it for them. So they're really interested, they really like it, they really want it, but they want somebody with the expertise to actually build and manage it for them. And the reasons behind that, obviously apart from the expertise and you know, the skills required to do that, and the fact that a lot of companies don't have them, and it takes a long time to build them. But also, I kind of mentioned it before, when you're building this automation becomes a really, really critical piece of infrastructure. If you're going to allow your machine to be able to make changes to a bunch of environments, you better make sure it's secure, right? Because you're giving it highly privileged access. Now, it generally requires a bunch of fairly high risk, high risk, what would you call it, missions, I guess. Certainly high risk access to be able to make changes. So, you know, if you're going to be able to replace EC2 instances or block IAM users, for example, that's a pretty privileged access that you're providing. So when you build this, really think about how you're going to do that, and make sure you think about the principle of least privilege for the machine that does that. So don't have a machine that you just give blanket access to do what it wants. You've got to make sure that you define that access for each individual action from an automation that you're going to perform in a customer's environment. So that's really important about how you build this automation for your customers.
It's a really good call out, Jam. And one thing I'd remind the students of is that one of the asks or the deliverables after you've built the platform is to run whatever you've built through a well-architected assessment, which will tease out a lot of what Jem mentioned there in terms of, is it architected against secure best practice?
SolarWinds is a classic example, right? We all know the story of SolarWinds this year, right? So because of the nature of what it does, it's a very trusted piece of software that gets installed in a lot of environments. And, if there's a problem with that trusted piece of software, you've got a big problem.
Hey, Jem, we're at the top of the hour. There's a question here, which I'll get to, but first I wanted to thank you for the hour that you spent with us. It's been super, mate. I really appreciate it. It's given some really good background around why you do what you do, how you do what you do, and given that kind of voice of the customer too. So it's been fantastic. Thank you again.
I'm passionate about it. I could talk for many more hours.
There's a question which was just really some feedback around some of the ideas that a particular team has had. So Augustina said, we're currently trying to implement security automation tool for AWS users where it will be triggered by guard duty and execute user customized playbooks on Lambda. For example, if there's an S3 bucket left running with suspicious activity like a backdoor, the user can set playbook to shut down, delete that bucket straight away when guard duty picks it up. So I think he's just after some feedback.
Yep, that's exactly the kind of thing we do. So we have some actions. I'll give you an example. We integrate everything we do into our Slack channels, and we have some actions that just happen, and we get a notification in Slack that it happens. We have some actions that effectively do a chat op. We use Slack as for chat ops. So we'll get a notification in Slack. Do you want to block this user? Or do you want to, what we do, S3 bucket is a good example. Do you want to block public access from this S3 bucket? And there's like a confirm button. And really the tuning of that comes down to a per customer basis. So yeah, absolutely. That's a great example of something that you would use guard duty and Lambda for. Is exactly how we do it. So it's really good to see. So, what I said before, like first thing you need to do is say, You know, if you were to get a notification from GuideGD about an S3 bucket, what would you do about it? If you were manually in the console, what would you do? And then you can go, well, okay, now if I wanted to automate it, how can I automate those actions? And think about the consequences of that action. If you accidentally block that bucket, actually it's a valid business activity. How do you unblock that bucket quickly? How do you know? Or is there a, you know, do you have an escalation? Maybe you build some escalation into it where it sends a notification off to the business owner of that bucket, which we haven't talked about tags. Tags are absolutely critical for how you manage your environments, because they tell you the metadata, they tell you about objects, they tell you about services, right? So we're a big believer in using tags. So every bucket should have a business owner. So do you send a notification to that business owner saying, hey, is this supposed to be publicly accessible or not? If the answer is no, you block it.
Final question here. Well, actually, just to mindful of your time, Jen. I think the final question there is from Tim. So in your platform, there's use cases by the sounds of it that are
absolutely
fully automated and semi-automated, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And again, I've mentioned before, this is an organic process, right? So we'll learn from previous experience. So, you know, we might have it as it requires confirmation, but if the answer is yes, block it every time, we'll get to a point where we say to the customer, you know what, we're just going to block it because every time we've asked you, you said to block it. Mm. So it's never static. We're always kind of learning and modifying it.
Yeah, perfect. Jem, thanks again. We'd love to have you back for the kind of final presentations.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Sit in those and give us some feedback and ask some questions of the students when they finalise their build. But again, thanks for the hour, mate. It's been great.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jem. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.